Hello and welcome to my channel. Today's story takes place in Pasco County, Florida. It is the story of two cases where the stand your ground defense was used. The first story takes place in Wesley Chapel, Florida, which is located north of Tampa. January 13th, 2014, moviegoers settled into the Cobb Grove 16 Theater to watch the 1:20 p.m. showing of Lone Survivor. 43-year-old Chad Oulson and his wife, 33-year-old Nicole, took the day off of work to spend some time together. They took their 2-year-old daughter to daycare, but told the caregiver she was teething and if there were any problems to get in touch with them. They went to a mall, ate lunch, then to the Cobb movie theater. Chad and Nicole entered Theater 10 and sat in the second row from the back of a wall in the regular seats. Above that wall are several dining seats called Cinebistro, which was closed at that time of day. I'm going to insert the surveillance video from inside the theater. The only time I will speak is to point out something. Also, the camera in the theater is motion activated, so the times not shown means there was no movement. This is from the right camera in the theater. The left barely captured anything. 71-year-old Curtis Reeve and his wife Vivian entered Theater. Here comes Curtis and Vivian taking their seats at 1:14. They're sitting right behind Chad and Nicole. Curtis reaches over to get some popcorn. Now he's starting the first of 3 times telling Chad to turn off his phone. That's number 2. This is the 3rd time. It's now 1:23 and he's going to get up and go tell the manager. Now he's in the lobby coming towards the manager's desk. There he goes. Okay, I have to pause it right here because after Curtis comes back from telling the manager, he comes back into the theater and the left camera captures him leaning over Chad, recognizing that he has stopped using his phone and that he didn't have to go tell the manager after all. What happens after Curtis sits down happens so fast that there is no possible way I'm going to be able to point it out, so you're going to have to pay very close attention. After Curtis sits down, you will see Chad's hand reach about over the chairs. Then Vivian and Curtis will react to it. The next thing you will see is Chad coming over the chairs and grabbing the popcorn and throwing it at Curtis at 1:26 and 36 seconds. At 1:26 and 38 seconds, you will see Curtis shoot Chad. So get ready, pay attention, because it's going to happen very fast. Here we go. So what you see now is dust in front of the camera after the shot has gone off. You see Alan Hamilton, an off-duty Sumter County sergeant, get up and walk over to Curtis, and he took something off his lap. The other person behind the sergeant is his wife. So she walks over and she gets on the phone to try to call 911. Vivian's standing up now. Obviously, Vivian is still standing and she is talking to either Curtis and Alan or both. Now the lights come on. Alan's still standing there, making sure Curtis doesn't leave from the seat. I think that Vivian and Curtis's son is now standing behind Vivian. You see Alan's wife is still standing. I believe that is the Reeve son. But I'm not real sure who it is, to be quite honest with you. Because according to him, he left and went to the lobby to call 911. I'm just leaving this on even though it seems to be the same footage. Now you see an elderly couple who were sitting right next to Curtis get up and they will sit down in the seats where Alan and his wife were. I'm just going to keep rolling until you see Curtis come into the frame again. There he is, leaning over. He may have said, "I hope he's going to be all right," referring to Chad, because Alan's wife will testify she heard him say something to that effect. Now you see Curtis leaning over again. Not real sure what he's doing. Eventually he's going to put his hands up to his face right here. So he may be rubbing his eyes at this point. So that's about it. You never really see the police come into the theater. So we're going to continue on with the story. The previews to upcoming films were still showing when the altercation occurred. Nicole had put her hand on Chad and her finger was injured when the bullet grazed it. Chad's last words were, "I can't believe I got shot." He took some steps towards the aisle, then collapsed. A male nurse took his shirt off and gave it to another man. Here is the male nurse and his girlfriend, who was also a nurse. This man on the left in the blue shirt was in the same aisle as Chad. Chad collapsed at his feet. He tried to help resuscitate him. He has blood on his hand, and both he and his son in the Tampa Bay hat have Chad's blood on them. Curtis Reeves was a retired police captain with Tampa Police Department and SWAT. The two nurses rendered aid to Chad. One performed CPR on Chad but was unable to save him. When police arrived, Curtis was arrested and moved from Theater 10 to Theater 11. He was photographed before his clothing was removed. and was put in a white protective suit. Curtis said he was afraid for his life and acted in self-defense. He was taken into custody. The theater was full of 25 people. Witnesses said they heard two men arguing and Chad say, "I am texting my daughter." Everyone in the theater was taken to the concession area to fill out a voluntary statement form detailing what they saw and heard. Lights came on in the other theaters in the complex. Movies were shut off and patrons were told to evacuate. The theater complex was temporarily shut down for 2 days. The following day, Curtis Reeves was charged with second-degree murder of Chad Oulson and aggravated battery for Nicole's injury. Bail was denied. Within 3 days of Chad's death, a trust fund was set up for the Oulson family. Nicole would need surgery performed on her finger. January 18, 2014, Chad Oulson was laid to rest. Over 300 people came to pay their respects. Chad was born September 28, 1970 in Illinois, where he stayed until enlisting in the Navy in 1990. He was stationed in several states before being sent to Jacksonville, Florida in 1994. He ended his time in the Navy in 1998, attended college, and met Nicole in 2003. They got married in 2007 and moved to Pasco County. Their daughter was born March of 2012. Chad loved to play the guitar, still rode dirt bikes, was working at a power sports dealership. He enjoyed camping, boating, riding horses, and recreational vehicles. He enjoyed playing dress-up with his daughter, taking her for walks, and reading books with her. He was described as a fun-loving man, family man who had a larger-than-life personality. He could put a smile on anyone's face. He would make friends easily and would do anything for anyone who needed help. January 23, 2014, Nicole was being represented by an attorney. He would provide counsel to Nicole throughout the criminal case against Curtis Reeves. The prosecutors subpoenaed the theater for video surveillance. A hearing for the judge to review the footage was scheduled for January 30th. The judge was going to rule on whether or not portions of the video would be played at Curtis Reeves' bail hearing set for February 5th. February 5th, 2014, Curtis Reeves' bail hearing lasted 2 days. Their surveillance video was played and witness statements that were taken that day were read. Curtis Reeves' son, Matthew, said in an interview with deputies on January 13th, he had texted his father, Curtis, telling him he was running late because he was supposed to meet his parents at the movie. Curtis responded back in a text that they were already in the theater and sitting in their seats. Matthew was actually entering the theater at the time and heard a loud noise and followed the flash of light, which was near where his parents were sitting. He helped Chad after he fell. The male off-duty nurse handed Matthew a t-shirt to which he applied to Chad's wound. At this point, he didn't know his father had shot Chad. He said his father was sitting there with a shocked look on his face. Nicole then screamed out, "He shot my husband," and Matthew went to the lobby to call 911, and nurses took over tending to Chad. The papers went wild, pointing out the hypocrisy. However, Matthew said he texted his dad at 1:01 p.m. and that Curtis responded at 1:04 p.m., that they were in their seats already. In the video, Curtis and Vivian are seen sitting down in their seats at 1:14 p.m. It wouldn't make a difference in trial anyway, no matter what time, Curtis replied. The statement Curtis's wife Vivian gave the day of the shooting was read, and she had stated that Curtis was hit after the shot. No other details were disclosed publicly. Curtis Reeves told officers he was afraid for his life and that Chad had hit him with his fist or his cell phone and it knocked his glasses sideways and that his left eye had to be washed out. He said Chad's cell phone was between his feet. Chad was to the right of Curtis, so it's hard to tell what may have happened to Curtis's left eye. In the still, Vivian is looking down at a shiny object believed to be the phone, and Curtis is extending his hand, getting ready to shoot. Vivian was behind Chad. If it is the phone, it was not between Curtis's feet. The judge ruled the surveillance video should be released publicly. Bail was denied, and a pretrial hearing was set for March 2014, but it would end up being delayed. I posted a link in the description to an ABC video that does seem to support that Chad threw his cell phone, but it looks like it hit Curtis's midsection and bounced off onto the floor when Curtis reacts to it by leaning forward. However, when Chad throws the popcorn, it is illuminating in front of where Vivian is sitting, and that will be important to note. This is the still photo. That is Vivian leaning over near the object. Curtis's arm is extended. February 8, 2014, the Pasco County Sheriff announced they would be offering mental health services to anyone who was in the theater that day of the shooting, and asked anyone who was experiencing trauma or needed counseling to sign up on their Facebook page. February 9, 2014, a memorial bike run was held in Chad's honor. The proceeds would go to the Oulson Family Fund. Over 1,000 bikers participated and came from all over the state of Florida and also from Georgia. Chad had previously participated in bike runs to help raise funds for Toys for Tots and for Jessica Lunsford. More fundraisers would also be held, including a golf outing. 6 different restaurants pooled together to donate proceeds to a college fund for the Oulson's daughter. March 11, 2014, the off-duty officer, Alan Hamilton, received recognition from the Pasco County Sheriff's Department for his actions on the day of the shooting at the Cobb Theater. April 16, 2014, the 2 nurses who rendered aid to Chad were recognized by Pasco County Sheriff's Department as citizens who sprang into action and began medical treatment trying to save a life. They were actually dating each other and sitting directly in front of Chad and Nicole. June 2014, tests on Chad's cell phone did not contain Curtis Reeve's DNA. In the crime scene photos, the phone is directly behind Chad's seat, and Curtis was diagonal from Chad. Curtis was appealing the bail denial. July 9, 2014 was Curtis Reeve's bail hearing. It was determined that his trial would be delayed for another year while both sides prepared their cases. The judge set bail to $150,000. July 11, 2014, Curtis Reeves was released on house arrest. He could leave only to go to the grocery store and church. He was had to have no contact with Nicole Oulson. August 19, 2014, Pasco County Sheriff launched an investigation into $7,000 that went missing from the fund set up by the 6 restaurants. The person who started the fund was supposed to transfer the money into the trust account, and attempts to reach the person went unanswered, and the person deleted their Facebook page. Fall of 2014, the defense team visited the theater to reconstruct the scene. Chad's phone was also analyzed, and it was determined he was on Facebook and a sports website. They were going to delay the trial until January of 2015 because they were still working on the witness list. December 4, 2014, the $7,000 that was missing was returned. No one was charged since the money was returned, but the person who returned it was the one who started the fund. He was the co-worker of Chad at the Power Sports dealership. December 17, 2014, an emergency motion was filed to allow Curtis to seek medical treatment. He fell 3 days prior and broke his hip and needed surgery. He would be placed back on house arrest after his treatment. January 2015, Curtis had to have a partial hip replacement, and there were still thousands of pages of discovery to go through and witness depositions. The trial would continue to be delayed for the next 2 years. The defense was now planning a new strategy, a stand your ground defense. January 2016, Nicole Oulson filed a lawsuit against the theater and the theater's general manager. The theater had a ban on weapons policy that had been in place since October of 2012. Theater employees were not properly trained on weapons procedures, and the manager on duty failed to de escalate the situation. Her lawyer declined to give details but did say the matter had been settled. February 21st, 2017, Curtis Reeve's Stand Your Ground hearing began. The judge set aside 2 weeks for the hearing. It would be just like a trial with no jury. The judge would be the sole decider whether Curtis would be protected under the Stand Your Ground law, which meant the defendant had to be justified in using deadly force to defend themselves, cannot be involved in criminal activity, or be an aggressor. The judge would hear testimony from witnesses from both sides. She would view surveillance videos, which by this time had been analyzed by video experts, including the FBI, who enhanced some portions, slowed down the frames, and had views from both cameras in the theater showing different angles. Of course, both sides saw something different. One side saw Curtis lunge at Chad, and the other side saw Chad lunge and throw his cell phone at Curtis. After witnesses testified to where they were sitting in the theater, what they saw and heard, the judge, prosecutors, and defense attorneys headed to the theater. The lights and volume were recreated. The judge sat in the seat where Curtis sat and asked the attorneys questions pertaining to the witness locations and testimony. The hearing wrapped up the first week in March. The judge would take everything she saw and heard under advisement and make a ruling. If she found that Curtis's case fit the criteria, he would be granted immunity from both criminal and civil prosecution. March 10, 2017, the judge denied Curtis's claim to be protected under the Stand Your Ground law. His attorneys immediately started the appeals process, which was also denied in 2018. He remained on house arrest, but his lawyers tried to get him removed from house arrest in 2019, citing his trial would likely be further delayed and he was not a danger. The judge denied this, stating the defense was the cause for all of the delays. Curtis's trial finally began on February 14, 2022. He was now 79 years old. It had been 8 years since Chad was shot. I'm going to briefly go over some eyewitness testimony. For the most part, they are all the same, so I'm not going to go through every single person who testified. I want to give you a good understanding of what the jury heard. As you will notice, most of the witnesses testified for the prosecution. This would be the same testimony the judge heard in the Stand Your Ground hearing in 2017. This witness testified he was in the same row as Chad. He was in the second seat from the aisle, and his son was in the first seat in the aisle. Chad was a few seats down to his left. He said he heard something about a phone. Curtis got up and was shuffling his feet and mumbling to himself and seemed to be annoyed. He was not having trouble walking and hit him in the back of the head as he was walking by. Curtis did not apologize for accidentally hitting him in the back of the head. He saw Curtis coming back, so he leaned forward so he didn't get hit in the head again. He heard Chad say to Curtis, "You're trying to get me kicked out?" Then said he was texting his daughter's babysitter. He did not see Chad try to leap over his seat. He didn't hear Chad swear or threaten or punch Curtis. After the shot was fired, he heard Curtis say, "I'll teach you to throw popcorn at me." Nicole and Chad started walking toward the aisle, and he heard Chad say, "I cannot believe he shot me." Then Chad fell on both his feet and his son's feet. He told his son to go to the lobby and call 911 and began resuscitation on Chad. Chad's blood was on both of their clothes. This is them leaving the theater in 2014. The man brought the hat he was wearing that day to court with him and set it on the stand. His hair had grown and was gray over the 8 years since the shooting. This was him in the theater right after he gave his voluntary statement. The witness testified that she was in the same row as Curtis. She was 3 seats to Curtis's right. There was one empty seat between her and Vivian. She saw Curtis keep leaning over to talk to Chad, then got up and was walking fast and mumbling to himself. He bumped her legs when walking by and seemed to be irate with an angry look on his face. He did not apologize for bumping her legs. She saw Curtis come back and she pulled her legs in. She heard Chad say, "You went and reported me?" She said Chad stood up, didn't leap over his seat. She did not see or hear Chad threaten Curtis. Then she saw a flash of red and it smelled. Then she realized it was a gunshot. Chad started walking toward the aisle, then fell to the floor in the row in front of her. Her seat was behind the seats Chad fell in front of. She thought Curtis was the one who appeared to be mad. She said Curtis just sat there after the shot. This woman was an amazing witness when she testified. The defense tried to trip her up, but she was not having it. She knew what she saw and heard. Chad was only 1 seat away from her to her left in the row in front of her. This witness testified she was in the same row as Curtis, a few seats down to his left. She said she didn't notice anything until Curtis stood up and left the theater. She acknowledged she saw Curtis come back and saw Chad stand up and said, "If it was any of your effing business, I was texting my daughter." Then he called Curtis a rude old man. She saw popcorn fly, then the shot. Chad did not leap over the seat or threaten Curtis. She was married to the off-duty Sergeant Allen, who secured the scene after the shooting. When Allen got up, she got up and followed him. She said Curtis was rubbing his eyes, face, and head. She did hear Curtis say he hopes he's going to be all right, referring to Chad. This witness sat in the same aisle as Curtis, in the first aisle seat, to the right of Curtis. Curtis had no problems walking when he left the theater. He moved his legs when Curtis came back to his seat, then saw Curtis lean toward Chad. He heard Chad say, "Do you mind? I'm checking for a text about my daughter." He saw Chad stand up and grab popcorn and throw it at Curtis. He saw Nicole put her hand on Chad's chest, then saw Curtis raise the gun and shoot Chad. He said Chad didn't leap over the seat, punch, or throw anything besides popcorn at Curtis. This man was the male nurse and was sitting in the row in front of Chad to the left of him, so in front of Nicole. He heard 2 men bickering behind him. He turned around and saw Chad stand up and said something about texting my daughter. He heard something being crumpled, didn't know what it was at the time, then heard Curtis say something along the lines of, "Throw popcorn in my face." Chad did not punch, threaten, or leap at Curtis. He said he and his girlfriend at the time, who was also a nurse, provided medical care to Chad after he determined it was safe to move after the shot. The off-duty Sergeant Alan Hamilton testified he was sitting in the same aisle as Curtis. He testified he admitted he did not hear much, but did not see Chad as the aggressor. After the shooting, he walked over to Curtis and took the gun from his lap and emptied the chamber. He said he heard Curtis's wife say, "That was no cause to shoot the man." Then Curtis angrily pointed at her and told her, "You shut your mouth and don't say another effing word." The defense attorney went at him hard, but he never wavered. Nicole showed the jury where they were sitting and said Curtis was using a rude tone when he asked Chad to stop using his phone. Chad ignored Curtis, and when he finally spoke up, he was shot. She did acknowledge popcorn was thrown. I know she is Chad's wife, but that seems to be consistent with what everyone else said. The medical examiner testified the bullet struck Chad in the base of his heart and a fragment pierced his lung. The toxicology report showed there were no drugs or alcohol in his system. The other witnesses called were law enforcement who were at the scene, those who processed the scene, forensics, medical experts, video experts, hearing and sound experts. The witnesses the defense called were medical experts to talk about aging and mental health and the effects arthritis and back pain has on an elderly person. A video expert testified using a lot of technical terms. Another video expert slowed the frames down and claimed there was something that shined like a cell phone in Chad's hand and it appeared to be thrown and was at Curtis's feet. They called the IT department for the theater because the video wasn't turned over right away, as if trying to imply that was an issue. A hearing expert testified about how people can't always be sure what they thought they heard. Another witness testified how sight can also be affected in the dark setting, and people may not have seen what they thought they saw. Curtis's son and daughter testified that their father's loving character and many aspects of his failing health, the manager who was at the desk and the woman who was standing in the lobby at the desk when Curtis came to report Chad using his phone testified that Curtis waited his turn and appeared calm. Vivian, Curtis's wife, testified that Chad was on his phone but wasn't talking on it, just the screen was on. She said that Curtis leaned over and spoke so softly that she couldn't hear what he was saying, but that Chad was loud and was swearing and being aggressive, and she was scared. She said Curtis got up, said he was going to tell the manager, and that she said to him, "Let's just move," but didn't remember if he responded. She also said she didn't feel comfortable sitting there, but didn't move because her son was coming to meet them because Curtis texted him to tell the son where they were sitting. She said Curtis was not angry when leaving the row or coming back to his seat. She said Curtis leaned forward, but she couldn't hear what he said. The next thing she saw was Chad leaning toward Curtis, and she was freaked out and terrified, thinking he was coming over the seats. She said she saw Curtis lean back toward the left, and his right leg was stretched out. She said she did not see anything after that because she closed her eyes. She only opened them after hearing the shot. She said Chad's cell phone was between Curtis's feet. In the crime scene photos, it is directly behind Chad's seat, and Vivian was behind Chad, but she claimed it was not there when she saw it. Pulling up the picture again, if you watch the video from ABC, you will see that after Chad throws what is believed to be the phone, she leans forward and is looking at it, then turns and looks toward Curtis as he is firing the gun. Her eyes could not have been closed, and I'm surprised the defense kept trying to say the phone was at Curtis's feet in the slowed video. It is only near Curtis when it bounces off him after he leans forward. Again, the close-up video link is in the description. One officer who was on the scene was called by the defense and asked if Chad's phone had been picked up and turned off, and he said yes. Another person with gloves on picked it up and turned it off, but couldn't be sure at what point it was picked up because he wasn't the one who did it. This was the only witness who wasn't related to Curtis or trying to debunk what the prosecution witnesses think they saw or heard. She was in seat number 2 in Curtis's row. Her husband testified for the prosecution and was in seat number 1. She said she saw Chad throw a dark object. Then a loud voice coming from Chad about texting his daughter. She saw Curtis lean back, saw popcorn, then saw a ring of fire from the gun. She did not see Chad leap over his seat. Curtis took the stand for 2.5 days. He talked a lot about his career in law enforcement. He said he politely asked Chad to turn off his phone and that Chad was facing the screen and told him to get the F out of his face and to F off. When the defense attorney asked him why he didn't just move, Curtis said he thought Chad was just being mouthy and he had dealings with people like that throughout his career and didn't see him as a threat at the time. He told Chad he had no choice but to go tell the manager. He said he was polite and courteous when he left the row and came back and said, "Excuse me." He told the manager that he feels kind of funny reporting that there is a man using his cell phone. The manager said he would come and take care of it. Obviously, Curtis didn't give the manager time because he returned at 1:26 and Chad was shot just seconds later, and it was still 1:26. Curtis said Chad made a comment about the manager and did acknowledge that Chad had put the phone away. He said Chad was not facing him but still talking loudly and that Chad turned around and stood up and thought he might have hit him in the glasses, but described it as a flash. And Chad used the F word several times and was volatile and was trying to come over the seats. He said he feared for his life and Chad was explosive and he looked like a monster. He said that Chad had come through the crack between the seats and that he had to lean back in his chair because he was afraid, because Chad was a threat. He felt trapped and defenseless. He said Chad was so full of rage and he had no choice but to pull out his gun and neutralize the threat. He denied he saw any popcorn until it was on the floor. He also claimed that never in his life had he ever seen someone act so aggressively. I literally paraphrase because Curtis used about every word in the dictionary to refer to Chad in a negative way. But all the words I did say, Curtis did use, and then some. When the prosecutors cross-examined Curtis, a Mirandized statement given to him the day of his arrest was different from the story he was telling on the stand today. Curtis also got to hear all of this before at the Stand Your Ground hearing, so he knew he would have to convince 12 people instead of a judge just how much he feared for his life. The prosecutor reminded Curtis in his statement that he said the first time Chad turned around, he was still in his chair, not standing, to which Curtis gave 4 or 5 different excuses before finally admitting Chad was sitting the first time he reached back. There were so many objections by the defense that finally the prosecution just had to read the statement just to get through it. Curtis said in his initial statement that when Chad turned around the first time, the popcorn had gone by the wayside. Then he was hit by Chad. Then Chad stood up and was standing over him like a giant and was out of control and was virtually in his lap, and that is when he shot him. The prosecutor pointed out that the first time Chad's hand comes over, there is no popcorn. The second time, when Chad stood up, is when the popcorn was thrown, and that it is when Chad was shot. The prosecutor had to show him still photos of the surveillance video with the timestamps and the video. Curtis said everything happened so fast, he was so scared and still in shock when he gave that statement. And the reason you couldn't see Chad attacking him the first time is because of the camera angle. Remember, Curtis said when the defense was questioning him that he did not see any popcorn until it was on the floor. Photos were taken right after he was handcuffed and he was moved to Theater 11. Both sides of Curtis's face were photographed, and there were no injuries. Both Curtis' son and daughter testified Curtis bruised easily. Curtis said his glasses must have blocked the phone from hitting his head. Curtis also said he second guesses whether or not he was hit with anything at all, though the statement he gave the day of the incident was that he was either punched or hit with a cell phone in the left eye, which needed to be irrigated. He second guesses the whole incident and wishes they would have just moved. Curtis said he didn't want to shoot anybody. He was just there to enjoy a movie with his family and was shocked that somebody would act so out of control and full of rage over such a trivial thing. Prosecutors believed Curtis's eye irritation was from him rubbing his eyes with gunpowder residue on his hands. Several witnesses said they saw Curtis put his hands to his eyes and rub them after the shot. They also reminded him he had a long career in law enforcement and he was claiming he never encountered anyone as dangerous as Chad. Curtis said in his job he was a peaceful negotiator. The defense told the jury that anyone who assaults a person over the age of 65 by law would be charged with a felony and that Curtis Reeves was within his rights to protect himself because he was being attacked and he feared for his life. They maintained that Curtis had arthritis and back problems and had to brace himself when walking to get the manager, and he couldn't have been the aggressor. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours before returning their verdict. On February 25th, 2022, Curtis Reeves was found not guilty. He was acquitted of both second-degree murder and aggravated battery for Nicole's injury. Okay, I would have had a hard time being a juror in this case. I watched multiple surveillance videos from both cameras, although the one I inserted is the one that was largely used at trial, along with enhanced versions. I listened to eyewitness testimony, and even the defense witness, they were all consistent that they did not hear Chad raise his voice until right before he was shot, which is consistent with Chad ignoring Curtis when it all started, which, by the way, is a total of 4 minutes from start to finish. Curtis started engaging with Chad at 1:22 p.m. and shot him at 1:26 p.m. When I look at the whole video, I see Curtis leaning over quite a bit. I don't see Chad react at any point. Curtis goes to get the manager. I think Chad had finally had enough after being pestered, and unfortunately he reacted poorly. I think Curtis was angry because Chad wasn't listening to him. I do think Chad either threw his phone or it flew out of his hand when he was angrily showing it at Curtis and made the statement about texting his daughter. I also have a hard time with Curtis and Vivian's credibility. They are the only two saying Chad was acting in a threatening manner and that he was swearing while looking straight ahead. I have eyes, and all I saw the first time is Chad's arm and in the slowed down version, a shiny object bouncing around. I did not see Chad in Curtis's lap. Next, I see Chad reach over the back of the seat and grab the popcorn and throw it, and 2 seconds later, he is shot. He was not in Curtis's lap. Curtis already had pulled the gun out before the popcorn in order to have shot him that quickly. That is probably why Vivian was looking over at him. Her eyes could not have been closed because before that she was looking at the shiny object in front of her. I based my opinion on what the video showed me and what witness testimony told me, just like a juror would do. I also read every page of the jury instructions, and although I would not have found Curtis guilty of second-degree murder, I think manslaughter did fit. I'm going by reason number 1 and 2A, which says or after it. You can go to Florida's court website if you want and see the instructions and all the documents yourself, and there's also surveillance video out there. Just like the instructions said, I used common sense. I didn't believe Curtis or his wife. Curtis especially was contradictory and over the top with his usage of adjectives to describe Chad. I saw through his BS, especially after he told his wife to shut her effing mouth after she said you didn't have to shoot. We know Chad wasn't texting, but that doesn't mean he wasn't checking to see if he had a text from the daycare. Should he have thrown his phone? Absolutely not. Curtis could have just sat in his seat without saying anything because he already acknowledged Chad was no longer using his phone. Both of them could have conducted themselves better. It should have never gotten to that point where someone lost their lives. It is truly a sad situation. Chad's daughter was 10 years old by the time the case went to trial. My heart breaks for Chad's family and friends. In June of 2022, Nicole started a foundation for children who suffered from gun violence. That wraps up story number one. Story number two takes place in Holiday, Florida, which is near the Gulf and north of Clearwater. It also took place in 2014. May 31st, 2014, police were called at 3:14 a.m. to report a loud disturbance at this mobile home. When they arrived, they found two men dead. The suspect, Christopher LaMarr Amy, was found 12 hours later around 3 p.m. on June 1st, walking on Mayberry Street in Holiday, which was over a mile away and a 40-minute walk from the mobile home. The victims in the trailer were 56-year-old Raymond Rossi, I couldn't find a picture of him, and 39-year-old Jason Heintz. Jason had just moved into the trailer not too long ago. Both he and Raymond had struggled with drugs in the past, and they were supporting each other in recovery efforts. Raymond had been a disabled veteran. He lost his leg in a motorcycle accident. He had a prosthetic leg and used a scooter to get around. Jason was working for his father at his company, American Door Sales and Services. There were two locations in Port Richey. Jason got Raymond a part-time job at the company. Christopher LaMarr Amy was Raymond's former roommate. He had spent the last 9 months in jail in Savannah, Georgia on drug charges. He was released on May 30th, 2014. He claimed that when he was released from jail, he returned to his home to find out that Raymond had a new roommate and that the crackheads had sold and moved his things. He said they started an argument with him when he went to retrieve his things, and he felt like he was threatened because they pulled a knife on him. He wouldn't go to trial right away due to changes in the law for the death penalty and stand your ground. He tried using the stand your ground defense, and a judge denied it. His attorneys appealed and won. In July 9th, 2019, 5 years and 2 months after the murders, Christopher stood before a judge again, and the date for his stand your ground hearing was chosen as October 25th. A man only identified as James testified he picked up Christopher on May 30th, 2014 in Savannah, Georgia, when he was released from jail and took him to the trailer home. Christopher returned to the car angry, saying he wanted to cut someone's throat for moving his things. An urn containing his parents' ashes had been moved. James drove Christopher to his house because he had no place to live. James said sometime between 9:30 and 10 p.m., Christopher walked back to his old home and returned sometime after 11 p.m. wearing only boxer shorts that were bloodstained. Both Jason and Raymond had been stabbed to death. Since this wasn't a high profile case, I wasn't able to find much more than this. I looked for the court documents and they were not published. It is not known who called the police at 3:14 a.m. on May 31st. I suspect it was James. He was probably freaked out that he had a murderer staying at his house. The arguments and murders occurred sometime between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., not at 3 a.m. in the morning, and no one from the trailer park called the police. By November 7th, 2019, somehow, Christopher ended up pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to 60 years in prison. I'm not sure why he decided to take a plea, but without knowing the full details, it's hard to tell. But if he did return after he felt threatened the first time, that definitely would not qualify for stand your ground. It does look like his attorneys tried appealing again in January of 2024, but as of March 2025, nothing has been released publicly. As far as the victims, each one of them were one of two children. Both of them had a sister, and they were both cremated. Raymond Rossi was a Navy veteran. His hobby was motorcycle riding, which came to an end after the accident where he lost his legs. Friends said even though he had one leg, he didn't use that as an excuse for sitting around the house. He used his prosthetic leg, and he worked. He was known for saluting and saying, "God bless you." He was described as a kind hearted soul. Jason Heintz' autopsy found he had no drugs in his system, so it looks like he was winning in his battle against drugs. He was described as being very reliable and kind, and he was well liked by the customers of his father's company. This concludes the two Florida cases where stand your ground defense was used. Thank you for listening, and I will catch you on the next video.